Welcome back to Definitely Not Definitive. I'm Ken.
And I'm Bethany.
And we're just a couple destined to be in love that loves reacting to some Destiny.
Yes, we do.
So we're back out at it with some My Name is Bife lore, and we're going to check out Destiny 1. We did all the cutscenes for Destiny 1. We did the lore for, the intro for Destiny 1, Book of Sorrows, up to Destiny 1. And then now we are, a lot of Destiny 1 in here. Now we're checking out some stuff. I guess there were some raids that we didn't get to see cutscenes for that we need to get some more information on before we move on to Destiny 2 cutscenes. So if you want all of our Destiny reactions, you want to check out our full journey, check out the description of this video. We got a playlist there for you.
It was now, in a time of great need, that we were risen into this world. But even as we took our first steps, we were in grave danger. After evading the Fallen, we found an old Arcadia jump ship capable of taking us to the last safe city. Guided by our ghost, we made our way past mountains and through storms, and it was here that we were informed of the true mission of every Guardian: to push back the darkness and to assist each other and fight for the light. We would go and assist Guardians on Earth and beyond, but first, we needed to head back to the Cosmodrome to slay Rixis. Rixis was an Archon rising of the House of Devils, and from his remains we claimed a near-light speed drive, which allowed our old jump ship to head out further into the system and to travel to other worlds. It was then that we explored the abandoned Cosmodrome and found not only that the Fallen were trying to break through the firewalls of a fragment of the Warmind Rasputin, a fragment of which was located in the Cosmodrome on Earth, but also it was when we discovered a hive nesting ground. This nest had been built into the old Skywatch of Earth, and it was led by a witch who we killed. The ghost handily assumed and deduced that the witch had to have come from the moon. We also reactivated an old array station, unintentionally connecting the fragment of Rasputin to systems all across Sol. Finally, we took on the Fallen Devils in their home turf, defeating their High Servitor, Sepix Prime, and dealing a crippling blow to the House. For a fledgling Guardian, to accomplish such feats was not unheard of, but it would be wrong to state that we hadn't gained the attention of a few important individuals. Next, we decided to follow up on what we discovered in the Skywatch and ventured out to the moon to discover what was happening and how the Hive had made it to Earth. Here we discovered a Hive temple known as the Temple of Crota, and after defeating its dark wardens, we retrieved a captured ghost who had died but had learned of a Hive plan to invade Earth. Investigating this further led us to infiltrate the Hive fortress known as the Hellmouth, where we discovered a Hive information database known as the World's Grave. This contained all the knowledge imaginable on the Hive and their plans. The World's Grave indicated that the Hive had been preparing to unleash their forces on Earth for centuries, and that their plans were nearing fruition. It was our job then to blunt the Hive offensive in any manner we could. And from here we then ventured back into the Hive fortress for several sorties, the first of which allowed us to destroy the physical manifestation of the Hive champion Crota's sword, and venturing deeper into the inner recesses of the fortress allowed us to destroy a shrine to Oryx himself and to defeat its guardian, Sardok. Finally, however, we received a desperate communication from the speaker, stating that they believed that the Hive were engaged in a ritual that was draining the Traveler of its light. We immediately rushed back to the Temple of Crota to infiltrate the fortress once again and stop the ritual. But it was here that we were greeted by a mysterious voice, the Exo Stranger. She told us that there were worse enemies than the Hive, and that we should go down and face them, and that if we survived, we should meet her in the Ishtar Sink on Venus. Having heard the words of the mysterious figure, we successfully stopped the ritual, which as it turns out was draining the light of the Traveler through the use of one of its own broken shards. But our job was not complete. Following the warning that there were worse foes than this out in the world, we headed to the Ishtar Sink on Venus and discovered, for the first time, the Vex. It is here, after slaying them en masse, that we discovered Elsie Bray, better known as the Exo Stranger. Elsie's identity would be a mystery to us for years to come, and it was only when we would rediscover her sister, Anna Bray, that we would ever get any note from Elsie in particular. But it was worth knowing that Elsie had our back, even if she didn't even have time to explain why she didn't have time to explain. She told us that in order to stop the Vex, and to stop a greater darkness, we needed to head to the Black Garden, where the Vex were born. We were informed that only after defeating the heart of the Black Garden would our traveler begin to heal. The only ones who knew the location of the Black Garden were the Awoken, and so we headed out to the reef to meet them.
Dickface.
They were at first very unwilling to work with us, and even greeted us with contempt, but Mara Sov sought an agreement with us, and so Prince Aldrin informed us that we would be allowed to enter the Black Garden only if a key was forged, and in order to do that, the Awoken would need the head of a Vex Gate Lord, and so we would need to head back to Venus to track one down. In order to do this, we would need to know more about the Vex as a whole, and so we ambushed a Cyclops and stole its mind core, then taking it to a nearby abandoned Ishtar Collective facility to study it. From here we discovered the true nature of the Vex and realized they were capable of traveling through time, and that they could organize and coordinate their attacks across many different timelines within seconds. Following this, we also worked to secure Venus better against the Fallen that had infested it, and it was at this moment that an Ishtar Collective laboratory was being broken into by the House of Winter. The Cryptarch, Master Rahul, convinced us to enter and to defend this place, so that the secrets within could not be stolen by the Vex. It was also here that we learned of the Vault of Glass for the first time. Tracing back the fallen intruders, we discovered a ketch belonging to the House of Winter, and boarded it, killing not only many members of its crew, but also its leader, the Kell of the House of Winter. Finally, we went to the Infinite Steps, and besieged the Gate Lord Zydron,
rocks his sword
taking its
all the
head
time.
and bringing it back to
Well, I
the
mean, if you had a
Awoken
sword that
Queen.
cool, wouldn't you?
Prince Aldrin then extracted the eye of the Gate Lord, allowing us to impersonate it and enter the Black Garden. However, the eye itself needed to be charged, and so we were told the location of the Black Garden and sent upon our way. We took the eye with us, knowing that this was our only chance of getting inside. We eventually found the gate to the Black Garden within Meridian Bay's
got a
greater
pink out
region known as
Like
the
the
Valley of the
golden wings?
Kings. The gate was massive
Oh, those are just
and
on
ominous,
his-
and even pulsed with some kind of strange
his
power,
boots or whatever.
but we could not access it immediately. This time, we would need to find more about what was going on, and so we investigated Mars. First, we looked more into the Vex, and realized that they were returning home here, and that the Black Garden and Mars were in fact the origin of the Vex. And we also investigated the Dust Palace, a place where the Cabal had been invading and were attempting to co-opt a Warmind system. It was there that we checked the subsystem in question and found that it was occupied by none other than the fragment of Rasputin that we had earlier been facing on Earth. Finally, we discovered a way of charging the Gate Lord's eye and defeating the Primus of the Blind Legion in our quest to utilize a Vex Spire to accomplish this. The Vex Spire was within the heart of Cabal territory, and so we had to raid a heavily armed and defended base, but we were successful nonetheless, and now was our chance to assault the Black Garden for good. As we made our assault, we made our way through copious numbers of Vex frames that were clearly ancient, and as we entered the Black Garden, these ancient frames were covered in moss. Such was the way of the Black Garden. It was a place where life flourished. But something dark had infected the heart of this place, and had infected the Vex as well. Not being able to comprehend it, the Vex had taken to worshipping it. This primordial thing that we faced in the heart of the Black Garden was not well understood, but it is best believed to be some festering remnant of the darkness that was dimming the light of the traveler. It was an imposter, an assailant, a villain. and we needed to destroy it. And so we did. It started to slave Vex minds to its will, and it began to awaken mighty Vex champions. But in doing so, it bound itself to these physical forms, and as we defeated each one of them, the heart of the Black Garden began to die. When finally it was destroyed, light returned to the system and the Traveler, and the Speaker began to call us home. We sat in the tower for but another small moment, and received a mysterious token from the stranger who appeared spontaneously. The token was her rifle, and with that, she told us that there were many other terrible, dark things out in the system. And so, we moved on. But our first few adventures were not just yet completed. There was one more that we would see to. The vengeance of Kabir, Pahanin, and Pradith. The Vault of Glass had lain dormant since that fire team raided its inner depths and was repelled. But it was now our fate to take on this challenge. We descended into darkness with 5 other Guardians, and using the Aegis left behind by Kabir, we defeated the Templar and its oracles, made our way through the Gorgon's labyrinth, and descended into the heart of the vault, finally discovering the Glass Throne. It was at the heart of this place that we encountered the true power of the Hazen Lords. That power was Atheon, Time's conflux, a Vex frame capable of manipulating the threads of time itself, sending both its minions and us backwards and forwards in time. But with the light, we had learned to wield and express our might, and it showed us clearly one thing. Even though Atheon commanded the threads of fate itself, we were Guardians, and we were above such petty causality. For Guardians sampled the truth of paracausality. The power of the light and dark applied to us as well, and we were able to manipulate the fabric of the universe with our very will. Guardians would not have their fate made for them. Guardians would make their own fate.
Yeah!
So Atheon was defeated, and the Vault of Glass was sundered. At long last, the fire team that had entered so long ago could all be put to rest. But this was only our first adventure, and there were many more on the horizons. The first of which would set off a chain of events that would culminate not only in our strengthening and the renewal of yet more light, but it would result in the death of gods and kings.
So the glass vault area makes me think of like when Superman goes in onto the place on his home planet to meet his dad.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I see it, that's what I think of. I'm like, Superman!
In our short time as Guardians, we had already accomplished what some believed to be impossible. But our duty as Guardians had only just begun.
Now 6 went
It
down.
was
one came
hardly a
up.
few months into our new lives
I think so.
when the first of the many crises that would come our way would rear its ugly head. That challenge was the rising Hive invasion on the moon that would now be spurred into action by its new ascendant champion, the Hive Prince Crota. His horde would rise to start their incursion on Earth, and the invasion would be one of terrible consequences were it not for a single lost soul that returned to us, Eris Morn,
There
the
she is.
last. She had been lost within the Hellmouth for so long, but with the impending danger of Crota's invasion, she managed to escape and made her way back to the tower where she would be able to warn us of the coming invasion. Though Zavala and the Speaker saw her new eyes torn from an acolyte to be a sign of corruption, Ikora Ray, the hidden leader, was pleased to see her agent return alive, and rightly trusted her to remain loyal to the tower in this time of great need. Eris would then direct us in a series of skirmishes and tactical strikes to defeat the invading forces of Crota and to stop the invasion before it could get
The
worse.
Zeppelin comes in.
First, we were directed to attack Sardon, the Fist of Crota, the commander of his armies on Earth. After breaking him and leaving him ruined within the caverns below the Cosmodrome, we then decided to interfere with an attack on the systems of Rasputin that would lead us into a new place known as the Seraphim Vault. If Omnigul and her forces were able to control the Warmind, or even merely disable it, then the victory of the Hive would be almost assured. The battle for the Warmind was brief, and there was a moment at which the might of Crota was summoned into the fray. Omnigul directing this massive ogre's rage in our direction was of no use, however, and the Hive were yet again struck down. And here, there was an opening for a perfect counterattack. Crota's soul was in the process of being summoned forth from the Ascendant Realm so that he could once again lead the armies of the Hive. Now was our opportunity to expel him back into the Sea of Screams and to deny his assault entirely. We headed deep into the Hellmouth, into one of the darkest chambers, and discovered his lair and defeated him in our mortal realm. Our task was not yet finished though. Crota would still be able to reach out into our realm with the many appendages of power that he held under his control, the other various Hive that languished throughout Earth. Our next task was to sever these servants from our world and to destroy Crota's power in our domain. The greatest of these servants would not be his eyes or his hand or his heart. It would be his will. Omnigul, the mother of his spawn, a Hive witch of terrible power. But even she was not powerful enough to stop us. And now, with Crota's power dwindling in the material realm, our war against him could have been considered at least somewhat over. However, there was no guarantee that the minions of Crota, as well as Crota himself, would not simply rise and return in another time. They were a disease festering in the heart of the moon, and we needed to be the fever that would burn them out. But beyond just this, there was not merely the safety of the city to consider. Eris asked us to do one last thing for her, and she asked us to do it so that she might finally see vengeance for her friends and her fire team. So we set out on a journey to raid the depths of the Hellmouth as they once had, and to defeat Crota once and for all. 6 of us went down into the pit, traveling to one of the darkest places in all our worlds, the Stills. The darkness here was complete and oppressed our light at every turn, slowing us so that we might be dragged into the swarm of Hive thrall that awaited us. We fought through the darkness, with enemies surrounding us at every interval until we finally arrived at the keyhole, a gateway from our reality into the Ascendant Plane. We held the bridge, opened the way, and stepped through. On the other side, we were greeted by darkness and a sky of green fire. We had taken our first steps into the Ascendant Realm, and we now stood within Crota's own sword world, the Oversoul Throne. It was crucial that we killed Crota here and nowhere else, for to truly kill an Ascendant Hive, you must kill them within their throne realm. Any other death would not be true, and would simply leave them regenerating here in time. No, here we had to slay him, and in this place we needed to use the logic of the sword in order to slaughter him.
Sword
We
logic.
proved our competence not only by crossing one side of his Ascendant Realm via the use of a bridge, most literally demonstrating our use of the sword logic, but also by slaying Yut, the Death Singer. We then summoned the Hive Champion to combat, and faced our very first god. It is crucial here to remember something Toland once said on the nature of Hive swords. He said that any other weapon of the Hive, such as a boomer or a shredder, only kills acyclically, that they send out harm and take nothing back. When the boomer's fire is all but gone, it is nothing, and when the shredder's ammunition has been discharged, it is no more than axion and neutrino scatter. But the sword goes on. The sword is like a bridge. It binds wielder to victim. It binds life to death. And when the binding is done, the sword remembers, and would be hungrier and sharper for it. This is the logic that rules the Hive, the logic of the sword, where the ultimate shape of the universe
It's like Grog's
would
sword.
be one
Yeah.
made sharp over eons of slaughter. It was once Toland's sage advice to Eris that should they seek power in their quest at any point to conquer the Hive in their own throne world, it would be best to remember that the ultimate arbiter in the realms of the Hive would be that of a sword made sharp with the blood of the conquered, blood that had been spilled over millennia. And so, we used these weapons. We slew Crota's sword-bearers in their own realm and claimed their blades, giving us access to a weapon that could destroy a god. And so, with our light, we stunned the god Prince, and with the weapons of the Hive, with his own sword, we sundered him from existence.
Kill him with his own sword.
At long last, Eris's fire team would know some form of
We're showing him
peace,
respect.
and Weining's death, as well as Ariana's, had been avenged. But woe to those that believed our struggle to be over, for at the moment of his death, Crota cried out across the night, and soon
Good daddy.
the night would answer.
House of Wolves.
Whilst Earth was still reeling from the Hive invasion, the death of the Hive Prince Crota would not go unnoticed by the other occupants of Sol. And so it happened that the Queen of the Reef would have use of such a talented guardian. The disgraced former Kell of the House of Wolves, Skolas the Rabbit, was released by the Nine, for reasons unknown. The Nine are a strange and shadowy organization, found to be dark matter made manifest, but their intentions have always been alien to us. It is unclear why Skolas was released by them, but perhaps in time we will discover. They also gifted him with a catch, allowing him to effectively begin to reassemble his old house. Mara's usurpation of the fallen wolves had always been an interesting question of loyalty for those that swore allegiance to her, and the fallen that had joined her had now betrayed her, rejoining their old Kell Skolas. The wolves would make an unsuccessful attempt on Mara's life, which in spite of failing, did cost the lives of many awoken corsairs. At this, Mara would know no boundary to vengeance, and her fury would be legendary. She opened the reef to the Guardians and petitioned them to hunt down the treacherous fallen wolves and their terrible Kell, Skolas. Our search began with the assistance of Petra Venge, the Queen's Wrath. She would send us to the remains of the House of Winter's stronghold on Venus, where Skolas was proclaiming himself to be the Kell of Kells. According to tales, the Kell of Kells would unite all of the houses, all catches would be bent to him, and at last he would be acknowledged by the great machine, the Traveler itself. We quickly tore into him and his forces, and whilst he was able to both escape and pull the House of Winter into his fold, we were able to follow him to his next target, the House of Devils. Here, instead of direct usurpation, Skolas attempted a subtler tactic. He used the assassins of the Silent Fang to try and eliminate the leadership of the house. This would have left a power vacuum which Skolas could have stepped into and thus used it to gain control of the house. However, the devils were prepared for him, and we found our way into the Cosmodrome and traced back the Silent Fang, eventually destroying them and giving Skolas no claim over the House of Devils. With this, Skolas pursued yet another house and went after the House of Kings, attempting to forge a diplomatic alliance between the two so that he could keep his Kellship afloat. We interrupted this meeting between the kings and the wolves' barons and slew them all where they stood, ending Skolas' hope of attaining the support of any other houses in the system. With no further fallen to support his claim, Skolas changed tactics and this time attempted to claim weaponry that would afford him a significant advantage. It is here that he turned to the technology of the Vex and to the infamous Vault of Glass. Amongst its confines, Skolas would find copious amounts of Vex technology, thanks to the weakened architecture of this place now that we had raided it. The mighty fortress was still able, however, to commit and create oracles to the situation, and Skolas was attempting to capture and use them, with some degree of success as well, it is worth adding. However, we destroyed these oracles and denied Skolas the chance to use their power. With almost no more options, Skolas ascended to the top of the Vex Citadel, a mighty and gravity-defying structure on Venus. There, he would hold his ground for a final stand. We pursued him, and even though he was able to use the Vex technology to pull the House of Wolves soldiers through time to his location, Skolas was unable to hold us back. A simple Kell is nothing to a Guardian prepared, and Skolas fell before us, laid low and left vulnerable for capture by the agents of the Reef. After being rewarded by Mara Sov and told of the thanks that the Reef would sing, we had the respect of a monarch, and a powerful ally was forged with the city. We would go on to defeat Skolas in one final combat. He languished yet again in the prison of elders, but his trial would be one in the ways of old, a trial by combat, and therefore we would be his judge, jury, and executioners. And in this trial by combat,
just kill the god,
there
so
would
he's
be
nothing.
no mercy, and we would destroy the former Kell of the House of Wolves once and for all.
Bah.
But this was not the enduring legacy of Skolas. Instead, it was his final conversation with Mara that would be of concern. His last words would be of a dark binder and a light snuffer. They left him whimpering in fear. But with his fear, Mara would know well enough who he was speaking of. Her, Eris, and Osiris would all meet in secret to plan for what was to come next. Skolas's words were but another confirmation of what Mara already knew. A terrible shadow loomed on the horizon, and they needed to prepare for it. A plan was devised to defeat the coming threat, but it would come at great cost. For now, another monarch was approaching, and he desired one thing: vengeance.
Good music choice.
Wrath. Behold the wrath of Oryx, bound in fury for the death of his son. The Taken King was making his way to our system, and in time he would make his mark upon our worlds in a manner that would be irrevocable. He would arrive in the system at Saturn's rings, and would immediately be met by Queen Mara Sov and a massive awoken fleet. Though the power of their vessels allowed them to contend with the Hive, it was the Queen's own devastating use of a weapon known as the Harbingers that would destroy Oryx's forces. But when Mara had gotten back to her feet, having exhausted herself in order to clear the way, one vessel still stood: Oryx's dreadnought. Upon the ship, the Taken King used the primary weapon of the vessel, allowing his throne world to fall outwards into real space, consuming and destroying all before him. Prince Aldrin was able to escape the terrible wave of paracausal energies, but Mara was left consumed by the wave, along with the Tekens Kali, Sadia, and Shuro-Chi. But Mara had accomplished her part of the plan. It was now up to Eris and the army of Guardians that she had motivated to kill Oryx's son. The system of Sol would never be the same. With these events, the Taken War had begun. We only discovered Oryx's arrival in the system when we traveled to a Cabal base on Phobos, which was under attack by a strange new kind of enemy. As sterile neutrino scatter filled the atmosphere and a shadowy presence moved its eyes to this part of the system, Eris's voice grew fearful, and then terrified. Finally, she cried out in horror at the realization that the father of her nemesis, the patriarch of the Osmium dynasty, was here, Oryx had come. He unleashed his armies of Taken across the system, populating our worlds with the dark and sickly forms of the foes we had once known that were now corrupted by darkness. The Taken had invaded. We quickly fled the moon of Phobos for our lives and returned to the tower to meet with the Vanguard. Whilst Ikora and Zavala waited, it was Cade who would put a plan into action.
Yeah, Cade.
He would task us with retrieving a stealth drive from the top of an old colony ship in the Cosmodrome. This stealth drive and Eris's ship that she had recovered from the Hellmouth would allow us to infiltrate the Dreadnought, although the stealth drive's malfunction led to the destruction of Eris's ship, as Oryx used his superweapon once again. Once aboard the Dreadnought, we disabled the weapon that had been attacking the Awoken fleet and established a beachhead from which Guardians could assault Oryx's ship. We were, however, not alone on the vessel. A group of Cabal from the Skyburners Legion, led by their Primus himself, was in the process of invading the ship. But when faced with the power of Oryx, he was but a minor nuisance. Oryx took the Primus right before our eyes, but this was of little concern to us. For the Cabal, though, it would be a devastating blow, and the Skyburners Legion would be left listless in the command of its two Bond brother Vallaces. We, however, would push further into the ship in search of Oryx, and found our way blocked by a portal that could only be accessed by an Ascendant Hive. So, in order to gain ingress, we would have to be as our enemy was. We would have to become, or at least pass for, an Ascendant Hive. We first returned to the moon and collected a portion of the crystal that once held Crota's soul, as he was being summoned back into the mortal realm. Following this, as well as the acquisition of personal stealth code from Warmind bunkers below Earth, we snuck back into Crota's own throne world, the Oversoul Throne. The Hive were holding a death ceremony for Crota there. We snuck in and used the crystal we had gathered earlier to extract the essence of Crota's soul. The Hive detected us, and the Taken were unleashed to fight us, but thanks to Eris and a few tricks she had learned from Toland, we were able to escape. With the essence of Crota's soul now in tow, we returned to the Dreadnought, and were recognized by the portal as Ascendant. We journeyed deep into the heart of the Dreadnought, and found Oryx at the center of his defenses. At his altar, we found the God King of the Hive, and in spite of all his eons of war and all the power at his fingertips, we prevailed. We struck down the God King and broke his resolve upon the anvil of our light. Oryx was forced to make a choice. Needing to retreat, he summoned forth his power and took himself, allowing himself to escape so that he might live to fight another day. But regardless of the fact that he had escaped, Oryx's corporeal form had been shattered, and the God King's blade, Willbreaker, lay broken. From the remains of the sword, Eris took a shard and gifted it to us, allowing us to forge the first swords wielded by Guardians in generations, with a little assistance from Lord Shax. We had to set the darkness within our new blades into balance, and to empower them with light. By killing the sword of Oryx, Ektar, we were able to accomplish this. With our new blades in hand, we set to taking apart Oryx's Taken forces within the system, killing his shades and his echoes throughout the worlds that were previously ours. He could not claim any more power when we had removed his stakes in these worlds, destroying those echoes. And with those echoes destroyed, we would descend upon his court, weakening those that fed him power through the tithe system that the Hive ruled by. With all of his tribute weakened, finally, we set out once more to kill a god. And so yet again, 6 of us went down into the depths of the Dreadnought, accessing Oryx's throne world through his court, and defeating his war priest, the beast Golgoroth, and his 2 daughters, Uranuk and Urhalak. before finally facing the Taken King himself.
Holy crap.
Oryx would make terrible doxologies to the darkness and would unleash the full nature of his power against us, as the sword logic dictated he must. But we were able to unleash a power of our own. By defeating the Light Eater ogres that had consumed great amounts of light, we were able to take this and set it free, detonating each orb of light like a bomb. This left Oryx decimated, and finally, after so many detonations had been struck, we broke the Taken King, and unlike his son, we broke him not merely with the powers of darkness, but instead with the power of the light. Sword logic had triumphed previously, but now we had shown the strength of the light. The inner complexities of the universe could be used instead of the simplicity and the edge of a blade. This was not sword logic, this was bomb logic. We slew Oryx utterly, and at long last, the lord and ruler of the Osmium dynasty, the scourge of 1,000 worlds, and the bane of trillions upon trillions of souls, was vanquished. But the legacy of this era would not soon be forgotten. Not only did we have to deal with potential contenders to the throne, such as Malok and the Darkblade Ala Kul, but we also found his calcified fragments, and stored within them, we found the records of the Books of Sorrow. With these pieces, and with their plans in mind, Eris took the remnants of Oryx's war priest, his daughters, and the ravenous heart of Oryx himself, combining them into the weapon that the Books of Sorrow spoke of. She paused for but a moment as she considered whether to create it or not, but her overwhelming desire to see her every hatred imaginable placed upon the hive drove her onwards. And when we who aided her in its construction had seen it completed, she gifted it to us. This would be the touch of malice, and it would repay every torment that the hive had dealt, but this time in the hands of a light-bearer. This would be the last remnant of Oryx, the means by which the God King would live on, and by which he would be empowered. But there was also one more threat that we had to deal with. The Cabal had sent a distress signal out from their vessel, the Dantalian Exodus 6. They had crashed it into the Dreadnought so that they might create a beachhead, but now they had retreated there, being pushed back by the remnants of the Hive and Taken forces that still swarmed the Dreadnought. Upon clearing them from the Dantalian Exodus 6's command center, we saw that a message had been transmitted by the Cabal forces of the Skyburners, and upon closer inspection, the headers of the message indicated that it was for the head of the Cabal Empire. In time, we would see this menace rise, but it would be at least another 2 years before we were faced with the terrible realization of who this would be. For now, we sat and waited, secure in the knowledge of our supremacy, until the next crisis loomed on the horizon.
Shot.
Mm-hmm.
See him breathing.
It was a mostly quiet year after we had defeated Oryx, the Taken King. The Taken War had left much of the system ravaged, from the Reef to Earth, to Mars, to Venus. But at long last, something new began to stir. Near the end of the summer, a strange grouping of nanites appeared within the Guardian population. They offered incredible benefits to the Guardians, but they also represented the risk of a major pandemic. And so, an organization known as the Owl Sector was activated in response to this sudden occurrence. The event, which would henceforth be known as the Transmission Crisis, was merely a precursor to what would come next. The nanites had originated from a Clovis Bray laboratory on Mars, where exploring Fallen from the House of Devils had broken in and had discovered the location of a valuable technology, Siva. With this, the Fallen House of Devils were on the hunt and returned renewed to a long-forgotten area of the Cosmodrome.
ChatGPT.
They headed into its northeasternmost sector and rediscovered the Plague Lands. And with that, an old wolf was roused from its vigil. Lord Saladin rose to face the House of Devils and rallied the Guardians to retake Fellwinter Peak, which had been long silent since the Iron Lord's defeat at the hands of Siva. As we moved to retake the mountaintop fortress at Vostok Observatory, we were greeted by the proof of the new power in the House of Devils. The house had been taken over by its splicers, the bioengineers and body hackers that every house holds a host of. They had resurrected an all too familiar foe, Sepix Prime, but Sepix was different. Part of its shell was missing, and other parts held a new kind of metallic material that was clearly not of the Fallen's own making. We defeated this hulking monstrosity and sent the devils into a full retreat. When we regrouped with Lord Saladin, he told us of this once great fortress and gave us the honor of reigniting the ceremonial braziers within the Iron Temple, signaling the return of the Iron Lords. We were sent deeper into the Plaguelands to investigate the new source of power and the strange resurrection of Sepix Prime. It was here that we discovered that the Fallen had taken Siva and used it to augment themselves. For a Fallen, this would not only provide the practical advantages of making them stronger in combat, but with the Fallen's faith and their reverence towards machines, they believed that they were being elevated into demigods. Demigod or not, these cyborg Fallen were of course still just Fallen, and in spite of their upgrades, they were no match for us. We then pushed deeper into the Plaguelands and discovered that the Fallen had used Siva to recreate and re-empower artillery emplacements within the Plaguelands, posing an imminent threat to the city and to the Guardians operating in the area. We stormed their position with all haste so that we might not give them a chance to cause any damage. Our time was limited, and so we were alone, but eventually we were victorious. It was then that Lord Saladin invited us back to the Iron Temple so that he could explain the history and story of the Iron Lords to us, as well as the story of how they had died to Siva. With this, we were sent to investigate the source of Siva itself, so following the word of the Cryptarch Tyra Khan, we went out to the Dust Palace on Mars, where we would find the original labs which the Fallen had broken into. Armed with more knowledge on Siva and having established that the Fallen had not fully mastered it, we set out into the Plaguelands to destroy the source of the nanites, the replication complex where the Iron Lords had fought and died all those years ago, atop which there was now a great fallen fortress. It turned out that Yolda's original explosion had not destroyed the Siva replicator, it had merely damaged it and left it dormant. With the Fallen now exposing it, nanites were flooding the entirety of the Plaguelands once again, snaking back and forth in vines twisting but giant, 10 feet across at times. Siva was on the move, and we had to stop it. But we also needed to get through the Fallen's defenses, and so we sabotaged them, not only destroying them but also destabilizing all of the Siva in the area, significantly cutting it back. From there we pushed into the Archon's fortress, and found that as we headed down, the replication chamber was in reach. But when we entered the Siva replicator, we found something far more gruesome than merely the Fallen. We found that Siva had taken the bodies and weapons of the Iron Lords, and had not killed them, but had twisted them and broken them, transforming their bodies and weapons into horrifying mockeries of what they once were. These were Siva Iron Lords, light weaponized against our light, and with that, we had no choice left but to free them and to kill the reanimated remains of these Iron Lords. Fellwinter, Galeon, and Yolda met their final rest that day. With the battle won, we set the Siva replication complex to blow and fled with our lives as fast as we could. Upon returning to the Iron Temple and giving Saladin Yolda's old helmet, he knew that at long last his friends had been laid to rest. And with this, he presented us with a new sword, the Young Wolf's Howl, declaring us to be the first in a new generation of Iron Lords. But there was one final trial that remained. Shiro 4, the Vanguard scout assigned to the Iron Temple, intercepted a Fallen transmission coming from deep within the Plaguelands. What he had intercepted was a message from the new leader of the House of Devils, who was beckoning all the fallen in the system to come to the Plague Lands, to a place that he was referring to as the Perfection Complex. He invited them to be reborn as demigods with Siva in hand. And this could mean only one thing. If the fallen successfully gathered an army to their cause, they would be able to push out and attack the city. Although this time, they would be empowered by the power of the Siva, and they would not be fighting for the sake of reclaiming the Great Machine. Instead, they would strike out in the belief that they were gods, and that they were owed the right to purge those that had wronged them. At Six Fronts, at Twilight Gap, at every opportunity. Yet again, we were forced to assemble a team. And with the 6 of us united in our cause, we struck out into the Plague Lands to shatter the Devil Splicers and their command structure. In the process of this preemptive strike, we defeated the second in command of the Splicers known as Vosek, the Archpriest, and we dismantled a terrifying siege engine atop a section of the Cosmodrome wall, which we sent plummeting into the sea. All of this before descending into the heart of the Perfection Complex itself, where the light ended and evolution began. It was here that we awakened and challenged Axis, the Archon Prime. The Fallen was no mere demigod according to them. It had been completely converted from biological being into mechanical beast. To the Fallen, Axis was a god. Not a demigod, not a pretender to some prophecy, but a true, fully fledged god. And with this, we needed to fight and destroy this machine now. For surely a god able to rally those to the banner cry of "I have defeated the Guardians, and I will now take their city" was all the more dangerous. And so we fought. But something that was quick to be realized by Axis was that evolution would not be enough. That's the thing about light. It shines where you least expect it, and even at the darkness where it ends, it can break through. Having broken the splicers and left them leaderless, a new age dawned upon the city. We were triumphant, and the city was secure. And thus began what is known as the Age of Triumph. We took to celebrate our great victory over the many powers that had risen against us. The whole of the city embraced what would be a new era of short peace. The children who were once frightened by the stories no longer being told and the dark forces that were encroaching upon the system were no longer frightened at all. But the signs that this age was short-lived were already present. Eris Morn would abandon the tower, heading out into the deep black to face the enemies of humanity once again. And in addition, the Fallen broke ranks, abandoning their old allegiances and leaving their armory and heraldry to burn. At first, humanity saw the retreat as a joyous sign of victory. The 100-year siege in which the city had endured at the hands of the Fallen had finally come to an end. But alas, with the siege broken, a far greater power was waiting in the wings. A power that would strike hard and fast at our ranks and would pose the greatest challenge to us that we had ever suffered. The Age of Triumph would be closed dramatically under a red shadow led by a dominating commander. And his name would be Gaul.
Oh, cool setup for going to the next one. The Red War, I think is what it's called. Yeah, so it was a nice recap to get this again as we go into Destiny 2. So I'm glad we checked this out. And I just love Bife's word choice and strong word choice to paint like a vivid picture in certain things. Like, you know, I said death and he said vanquished and like, you know, plummeted into the sea and, you know, he burned it like we would be the fever that would burn his darkness away. It was, yeah, so I just like, I liked that.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I love his use of language.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very helpful to get a recap, like you said. It had been a little while since we touched on Destiny. And I think sometimes in my brain, for whatever reason, with some of the more futuristic sci-fi and space ones, I will sometimes like cross them in my brain.
Yeah.
So it is helpful to occasionally have a recap like this. I love Mara's story and like going back in and re-exploring that. And I think this did a really great job setting up what is to come. I mean, like that last line, and his name will be Goal. I mean, just like the oomph that had was get a little bit of chills with that. And I don't even know who the guy is yet.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely sets up some high stakes that we're getting into. And yeah, it was good to see that some different gameplay that we'd seen from what we watched in our cutscenes as well. And some of the raids that we hadn't seen. Like, I mean, to see, I can't remember which one is Orcs, the Taken King.
Orcs.
To see him like all huge in that raid or whatever was badass, and shooting out his heart or whatever, and then him just floating away in space. I thought that was a cool ending. I mean, the Taken King, out of all the stories, out of all the expansion that we've seen so far, is my favorite. Although I do like Rise of Iron and Lord Salad.
Lord Salad.
That's his name for me, Lord Salad.
I also really enjoyed getting to see a different player's customized character.
Mm-hmm.
The one that we'd seen previously, the character looked a lot more, I think, futuristic and sci-fi and kind of punk rockish, whereas this one looked like a Templar Knight. A Templar Knight that had been, given a few little modern upgrades and transplanted into the world of space travel.
And looked young, like a little boy when he didn't have his helmet on. Yeah,
he absolutely did. So that was just kind of a fun thing that I noticed. When you see a different player going through the game, you get to see how they would choose to portray their character.
Yeah, I agree. Let us know what you thought about this down below in the comments. And if you want all of our Destiny reactions on our full Destiny journey, go ahead and check out the description of this video. We got playlists there for you. We'll, of course, continue. And the next thing we check out from Destiny will be the Red War. So thanks so much for checking out our reaction for Destiny 1 recap from My Name is Bife, but just keep in mind
that our reaction is definitely not definitive.